Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stories of Sash podcast. It's me, Sash, and yes, today is a very special day actually because we're joined with my good friend Robert.
Hello.
Rob, would you like to tell the viewers wherever they may be across the country, the world, currently situated?
I am currently sat at my desk in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, which is a long way from where you are.
It is, because I am in the UK, if those viewers don't know already.
Thanks to the miracle of technology, we're creating a podcast across continents.
I had no idea that this could be done. I didn't even know it was plausible. So, I mean, it did take, us a couple of goes to get things going. But thank you to, I think this app is called Anchor. And it's a very good app because it can do this sort of thing. So, and the quality is very good from what we've just trialed. So happy days. Anyway, welcome everybody. And today's podcast is kind of going to take the format of what I've done before with my two limited podcasts, which is basically just a bit of chat about motoring and a few bits and pieces. So to give you a bit of context, I've known Rob for getting on for nearly 7 years now, believe it or not.
Oh, really? 7 years?
Yeah, mate. We're getting old. So we met when we were at university. We lived in the same house in first year.
Should we tell the story of how we met?
Yes, I'll tell you what. I'll let you tell the story.
Shall I tell you that story?
Change of voice. Yes.
Yeah. So I met Sash because we both got into Swansea University through clearing. I was definitely through clearing. I don't know about you.
I technically wasn't, but let's just go with the clearing just for argument's sake.
So I think it was the same case for you as it was for me. I hadn't obviously applied, hadn't intended, or hadn't deliberately intended to go to Swansea University, so I hadn't applied for any accommodation or any of that kind of thing. And to get around that problem, the university set up a Facebook group where people who hadn't got any accommodation could kind of make friends and then go out and get a house to live together at university, and that's kind of how we met.
Yes, that is exactly correct. And for those of you who don't know, Swansea University is in a place called Wales, which, believe it or not, is a separate country. Yes, so yeah, that is, and it'll be 7 years in September. So when this podcast goes live, which will probably be in August at some point, it'll be nearly there. So anyway, actually, it's quite interesting that we're actually filming this podcast on the last day of July, and in the UK at least, it has been the hottest day I think of the year. Where I am currently situated, it hit 35 degrees earlier, and in true British fashion, I was sitting outside in my garden after work, enjoying life, having a bit of dinner, a beer, and so on. And just as I wanted to record this podcast, it started to rain. So I have relocated indoors, and I spent most of my day today indoors at work, luckily in air conditioning, which has been quite pleasant. But I did want to enjoy the sunshine, but it seems that it's gone and there's going to be thunderstorms, and I've just checked. So anyway, that's the way. I'm guessing you don't have that problem in Abu Dhabi, Rob.
We have thunderstorms. We definitely have thunderstorms. We had a sandstorm last week, which was an interesting experience. Because people talk about sandstorms as a bit like talk about blizzards. Really, it's kind of like an orange blizzard. But at this time of it's basically whenever there's some strong winds. It's to do with strong winds and humidity essentially. So if it's humid and there's strong winds, the dust gets picked up, and the humidity in the atmosphere will actually keep it in the atmosphere, and it will turn the sky and pretty much everything it touches orange. Which, as this is a motoring podcast, is obviously very bad for your paintwork because it basically deposits highly abrasive sand onto everything. But you can be the middle of the day and it's raining. And it's like fog, but it's like abrasive, windy fog. So it is actually very, very unpleasant. But we don't see too many of them. But it's 45 degrees, orange. You can't see a hand in front of your face. You're being ripped apart by sand, and it's raining. So it's not it's not the best weather I've experienced, put it that way. But I mean,
No.
today's been fairly palatial. It only got up to about 47 degrees.
Oh, right. Pretty mild then, you know. So to put that into to context with the viewers, so obviously we were discussing the other day. So we hit 35 degrees, which I'm just located just north of London, so fairly inland, and that's the hottest that we've had this year. I mean, what's it like at the moment? What's the average temperature at like day and night, sort of?
Currently, it's nearly 10 p.m. here, and it's still 35, 36 degrees outside, and about 80% humidity. During the day, it gets up to the mid to high 40s. It's actually fairly cool this year. This year, for some reason, it's been slightly cooler. Normally, for about this time of year, we'd be touching the 50s, low 50s between 12 and 5. Tell me,
COVID.
I mean, I've been thinking about this as well.
I mean, I hate to bring COVID into this because I know everyone's probably talking about it as they normally do at the moment. But I suppose less cars have been driving around because people are working from home. Is that a fair assumption over there?
I think here less so, because there is everybody. The car is the way everyone gets around. We can come on to this in a moment. I think here what it is there. It's a big industry in this part of the world, other than the obvious oil and gas industry, is aviation. There's a lot of very big airlines keep their hubs in this part of the world because they serve as a brilliant stopping point between the Western world and the Far East. And they run a very interesting business model because of their geographic advantage. And there's a sort of microclimate around the Gulf based on the fact that you've got all these airliners depositing CO2 into the atmosphere, and you create a sort of a localized greenhouse effect. And I think, and I've read some news about it as well. They think that that's possibly why this part of the world is having less of a summer than it would normally have. Right.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I still think 47 degrees is pretty toasty still. I mean, it may not be the 50 odd degrees that they're used to. But, you know, it's not even here or there. So, yeah, I mean, so, Rob, I mean, a lot of people are probably interested right now because you live in the exotic part of the world where they grow oil, to put it simply.
We've just got these oil trees where, you know, you've got big oil drums just hanging from trees, and we just go out there with a net and pick them off. Yeah, it's
that's
like
what I'm thinking. It's like getting grapes off a vine. You know, you get drums off a tree over there.
We have oil vineyards. Yeah.
So what?
You go to the petrol station, and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful 2003 vintage. That'll be delicious.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's what I'm envisaging right now. And it's funny you just mentioned wine because I've got a nice bottle in front of me. But that's beside the point. So the point I'm trying to make, though, is the fact that because it's so widely accessible, it costs pence over there in comparison to what we're used to in the UK.
Yeah, we had this discussion last night when we were kind of planning this podcast. It is cheap compared to the UK here. So, for example, I fill up my car with super unleaded now because it's my car, and it's in my mind it's a performance vehicle, and that is around 38 to 40p a litre in Church of England. Now,
yes,
and what you were saying, tell me more about how difficult your life is. I was saying to you yesterday that compared to the countries around it, we're still paying twice or three times as much as Saudi Arabia, for example, or Iran or Kuwait, where their fuel is, 10, 15p a litre. And, I was saying, it's actually quite expensive. 16 quid a tank is quite expensive. And then you're like, shut up, Rob.
Well, yeah, poor you. I really said, but I'm guessing I've got the whole of the UK backing me up right now. However many people are listening to this podcast, it may only be two other people, but they will both back me up in saying that, it costs about 45 quid to fill up my car. And to put that into context, I drive a little Fiat Punto, so it's not exactly the most largest capacity tank in the world, and so on.
If we put that into perspective, it's like fuel in France and Germany costing 60p a litre and you paying £1.20 a litre in the UK. If you knew that France and Germany were paying half, you'd be upset, wouldn't you?
No, I would, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm paying 1/3 of what you pay, so I'm not going to get any sympathy from you. But
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Well, so this begs the question, though, Rob. So the fact that oil is so cheap out there and petrol is so cheap out there, I'm sure the viewers would expect, as would I, that you're driving some sort of muscle car or a V12 out there or something like that. You know, because if fuel was that cheap, I'd have a Lamborghini outside, surely.
Well, how much does a Lamborghini cost in the UK, Sash?
Well, I mean, it depends. But when I say Lambo, I mean maybe an old BMW or something like that, like a 7 Series. But there is still that financial barrier to owning a Lamborghini that both you and I have. It's not. Well, the cost of petrol's cheaper, therefore I can afford a Lamborghini. That's not how it works. Well, no, but true. But I'm being over exaggerating a bit. But so the viewers might be thinking, if I was listening to this podcast, I'd be thinking, yeah, he definitely owns. Why would
I be owning a muscle car? Well, let me tell you why I don't own a muscle car. Even here, where fuel is very cheap, they are very large. They are actually. I mean, we do see a lot of them. A lot of people do follow your logic and purchase a muscle car for their own personal use, but they are essentially aircraft carriers for the road.
Right.
And their fuel consumption matches the fact that you can land an F-15 on them, and they're still only coupes. They're still only 4-seater, but they're still only 2-door cars, and they are the size of Luxembourg, and they don't corner properly. They guzzle fuel. They're not actually very fast, and a key consideration for me, especially at the age I am, and the fact that I do enjoy driving cars, is I want a manual car, and you can't get very many muscle cars in a manual. In fact, you can't get very many cars here at all in a manual. But
I mean, that's a fair argument. I wasn't going to bring that one up, but yes, no, that's true, to be fair. Because at the end of the day, though, Rob, it's not like you've got family or kids. It doesn't matter if you've only got 2 or 3 doors in the car. But yet, you've gone for probably, in my eyes, is the most sensible car, albeit in a nice spec, obviously, which we'll get onto in a minute, of them all. Like, if anyone who knows anything about cars out there, if somebody said to you, I really want to buy a car and I have no interest in cars, and I want something that's going to be reliable, and I want something that's going to last me a long time and be economical, etc., they would tell you to buy this car.
No, they would.
Right?
They would tell you to buy a Kia because they come with a lifetime warranty. If you have no interest in cars, you don't buy what I've bought. You don't buy anything German. If you have no interest in cars whatsoever, you see a car as a taxi that you have to drive yourself. You take no interest in it whatsoever. And therefore, you would buy probably something fairly bargain basement, the Tesco value of the automobile world, which in my mind is something Japanese or Korean.
Well, I mean, granted, I get where you're coming from, but so let's put the people out of their misery. What have you very recently purchased?
Very recently, I have purchased a 2012 Volkswagen Golf R. Which I would like to defend my purchase, because you're going to tell me that I'm boring, and
you are.
I mean, I am boring, but it's actually a very, very nice car. It's something that what you tend not to appreciate when you live in Europe is that all cars are very good. They all drive very well. They all handle properly. They're a very high standard. What I've been doing for the last couple of years is driving company cars that are primarily American cars for the American market, and they are terrible. They are utterly appalling. And to be back in a nice, well-built manual European car is absolute bliss.
I mean, I entirely get where you're coming from again. I can't imagine going my life for nearly, it's been over 2 years for you, where you've basically been driving automatics, right? And terrible
not good automatics.
Yeah, terrible automatics, which we can go on to in due course.
Let's wrap up about the Golf. Yeah, let's wrap up about the Golf. I think what you're saying, there is some truth to what you're saying about if you want to point someone in the direction of something that is everything a car should be, the very essence of what a car should be. I think the Golf definitely, and within society, it's become that as well. Is that the Golf is pretty much the definition of the automobile in the 21st century, especially in Europe, especially in the UK as well. I mean, if you've got additional requirements for whatever lifestyle you're leading, if you have a family, if you know anything you want to achieve with a car, you can pretty much do it with a Volkswagen Golf. And now the R spec is pretty much the top of the range hot hatch edition. It's probably not the most hot hatch of the hot hatches you can buy, but it's probably not even the most exciting hot hatch you can buy, and I'll admit that. But it is definitely, I think it's definitely sort of the pinnacle of what defines what an automobile should be in its most raw form.
I mean, that's, again, I entirely see where you're coming from, and I would agree with you. They are good cars. Bit dull, but they are good cars. But you've got a history of this anyway, so yeah. So I mean, let's quickly tell the viewers about, Volkswagen isn't exactly a surprise brand to you, because I think I'm right in saying you grew up around Volkswagens. I think your mum had quite a few, and so on. So tell the viewers exactly, where did your car journey start?
So I don't know. Well, so obviously my mum had when we grew up, we had a Volkswagen Passat, 1991 Volkswagen Passat, which was utterly indestructible. I think it was a 1.8 petrol, and that car took us everywhere on family holidays. When we moved house in that car. It was fantastic. We all loved that car to bits, and eventually it did die at, I think, about 250,000 miles or something. It had earned its keep, and I'm not quite sure why, but after that, Mum bought a Ford Focus C-Max, which
it's terrible.
It wasn't a good car for what we needed it for at the time. It was very useful because you could take all the back seats out, and it was then essentially a van, which was quite handy. That was, but none of us really liked that car, it has to be said. And then Mum bought a Volkswagen camper van, and yes, I mean, I've obviously grown up around Volkswagens, and my first car was a Volkswagen Polo, which I think you probably remember from university. It was, I do. I think I paid about £1,000 for it. It was a 1.4 single overhead cam, which was important because the double overhead cam had 15 extra horsepower, and I couldn't find one. But yeah, it was a good car. I learned a lot about cars from that car, because being at university, being a student, I didn't have the available cash to take my car to be fixed all the time at a garage, so I had to, and you helped a lot with this as well, so you'll remember, is we both of us actually serviced our own cars. We maintained our own cars. We did a lot of our own maintenance, and there was a lot of things that car taught me about cars, and I made a lot of mistakes on that car, and it was quite forgiving in my maintenance mistakes. I mean, I once made a bit of a mistake with the thermostat, and it was continually overheating. So I remember you had to come up to where I was working at McDonald's at the time. You had to come with the jacks and the bucket to McDonald's.
I did, yeah.
We had to drop all the water out the car. And I had to take the thermostat housing apart and take the thermostat out and put it all back together, and then put it all back together and just run it without a thermostat. And I had to do that out in the McDonald's car park, in the car park at the McDonald's I was working at university.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
But it did survive stupid things like that. It survived the fact that I overheated it. I mean, and that's quite a dangerous thing, because it just literally can't get any of the heat out the engine. It survived that, and it survived. What crossed my mind then is I actually sold that car, and I'm just thinking, if anyone's listening who bought that car off me, but I mean, I have checked recently, it's gone to the car park in the sky now, so that's okay.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
Oh no, that's sad.
Yeah, and then because of that thermostat incident, I also had a problem because I took the thermostat out and I went, well, that's kind of fixed all my overheating problems, because it then just flushes water around the radiator the whole time. In the winter, then I was driving back home to university back from home to university, and the car would not get warm, which meant I had no cabin heating. It was December, or was it January? I had no cabin heating. I had to drive 200 miles back to university with no heating in the car. And I kept getting cold, so I'd pull over at service stations and park the nose into the bush, and then wait for the engine temperature to get up again, and then blast the cabin heater to warm myself up. So yeah, I mean that car was great. I absolutely loved that car to bits. And I think everyone has that relationship with their first car, because you have to get that crap job to, you're being paid no money at all, and you work your whole summer to afford a car, and you end up absolutely loving it because it's your blood and sweat and tears goes into that car. And I think the same for you is when you own it as well, your blood and sweat and tears goes into that car.
Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't put it better myself. I mean, the trouble is nowadays, I think a lot of younger people who are passing their tests and getting cars and so on, they don't necessarily experience what we've experienced, because everyone gets a car nowadays on finance or PCP or whatever. So when, they pass their test, they go, oh, I'll have a brand new Kia Picanto on finance because it seems as affordable, or they buy like a relatively new one, and they don't go through this pain. I won't go into the whole finance thing right now, but yeah. So you had the Polo, right, which I remember fondly. You had that. And this is important for the viewers to know. That was in what color again?
I can't remember the exact name of the color, because it did have an exact name. And the reason I bring up the name is because the next car I had after had exactly the same paint number, and it was a silver car. It was a silver Volkswagen, which is not very exciting. And you're going to bring this up, so I'm going to take this thing out. It's not an exciting color for a car at all.
No, it isn't. So what did you then go and buy after you had the Polo?
Then I bought another Volkswagen. It was a 1.9 TDI Bora. Now, again, it is in silver, and I bought that on the back of the fact a friend of mine from home had one while we were at school, funnily enough, and it was.
Did he have kids?
No, he didn't.
No.
Although in my part of the world, having kids while you're at school is fairly common. But he didn't. Let's not touch that. He didn't have children. No, he actually ended up owning two of them. He had one in silver and one in, well, he called it champagne. Anyway.
Oh, I think I remember this. Yeah, go on.
Anyway, no, and it was a very good car. But we were both going for our year in industry, and I was going to be living back at home and commuting every day, and I was like, well, I need to have something that's dependable on the motorway, has the better fuel economy, isn't going to tire me out driving every day. I was doing about 100 miles a day commuting, and yes, that's why I bought the diesel Bora. Again, it's not a particularly exciting car, but it is it's a fantastic car, as a car supposed to be, for the job a car is supposed to do.
Yes. I mean, yeah, I must confess I never had much care in the world for your Bora. I thought it's probably the most dull car I've ever seen, or one of the most dull cars I've ever seen.
It's not quite a Vauxhall. It's not quite a Vauxhall Vectra. It's definitely got something a bit more about it than a Vauxhall Vectra. Well,
we'll get Mike on the podcast at some stage, and this is the guy that Rob is referring to. Perhaps he'll defend his Vectra. But but fun fact, and I know this for sure, at least as of last week, when I last saw it, that Bora is still on the road.
It is. It's. I think it's your dad's pride and joy now. Is that?
It is. So the story behind that, viewers, is that when Rob relocated to Abu Dhabi over 2 years ago now, he wanted to keep his car, and so to speak, and have access to it whenever he came back to the UK. So he didn't really want to get rid of it. So I took it under my wing, or under my family's wing, and I said, well, and it was just kind of weird timing, actually, because my dad's old car completely exploded, and we said, well, if my dad uses it, blah, blah, you can come back and use it when you want. So that's kind of the long story short about it. But I'm delighted to say it it's at 199,000 miles as of last week, so it's nearly at 200 now.
Barely running for a diesel.
Yeah, barely running, but it's going. And since I've had a bit of time to spend around it, I can appreciate it for the car that it is, and it is. Those engines are just indestructible. If you are interested, viewers, they are the PD engines, I believe, and it's the 130 brake horsepower. But there's a load of different stuff online. I think Car Throttle did an episode about how the same engine in an Octavia did like 440,000 miles, and it was barely running. And I think they had another one in an Audi which has done like 500,000 miles. So they just go on forever and ever. And funny enough, my dad's just done some quite big jobs on it, and he only just got the clutch done about 12,000 miles ago or something like that. And that was the original clutch that we're led to believe. So it's crazy to think that it still had the original clutch.
Whilst they are not the most interesting cars, I mean, you do end up absolutely loving them because they're actually a really enjoyable car to drive. And I find this, I tell you, I wax lyrical about Volkswagens in particular, but they are just a really pleasant vehicle to drive. They're really, really well thought out in terms of the ergonomics of driving, and you do end up absolutely loving them. I've done some really big journeys in that car, and whenever you get to the end, you can feel completely worn out, and the car just feels like it's ready to just carry on across a continent. It's a fantastic thing to behold. You never worry. It is a tractor. It's diesel. It's dependable, but it is a fantastic thing to drive. And I mean, when I first bought it, I was a bit a bit unexcited by it in the respect that it was not particularly adventurous. But the places that car's taken me and the things we've it's enabled me to do, because it is just reliable as the day is long. I absolutely love that car. And I think your dad now feels the same to the extent what's he done is he's
well, he's recently, literally as of last week, actually, I helped out with this. During the ownership of the car, it's always had, even when you bought it, Rob, I think I'm right in saying it had that era of VW. I don't know what they were making the steel out of, but it was cheap Russian steel as far as I'm concerned, because they just rust. Not everywhere, but the prime area for them to rust is on the wings.
Do you know what it is? It's for some reason somebody in Volkswagen thought it would be a good idea to put some kind of noise dampening sponge inside the wings, and especially in the UK, they fill up with water, and then you've just got water pressing against the inside of your wings the whole time, which causes them to rust.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and so much so that the driver's side wing had just completely disintegrated. I mean, up until last week, it was, I mean, you could just touch it and it would gradually just fall apart. So it's something that we've been wanting to change for a while. And so what my dad ended up doing actually was buying another Bora as a donor vehicle in silver, obviously. I don't know what possessed him to do this, and it was kind of out of character for him. But and he said, what I want to do is parts on it, because basically the car suffered with a bit of an accident last year before, whatever it was, and I had to buy a load of body panels quite quickly that weren't necessarily in the best nick. So we've changed stuff like the bonnets, the grille, the wing, and a couple other little bits and pieces. So now it actually looks relatively fresh. I say
Good.
Relatively, it's a lot better than what it was, put it that way. And there's no serious rust anywhere or anything like that. So yes, that's a
brief history of my car ownership. The cars I've actually owned.
Yes.
Yeah, which it's not very exciting. It's a cacophony of Volkswagen,
Yes, I mean it is. I mean, not terribly, but yeah, at least you've stayed loyal to a brand, and I respect that in a person when they stay loyal to a brand. I wish that I'd chosen a slightly better brand for myself, but yeah, because mine just seems to be Fiats and Alphas and so on. So, but yes, so moving on from that, I suppose one thing that obviously we can go on to about some of the stuff that you've been doing over the past couple of years, but still going back to the uni years, if you like, and I think the viewers might be interested in knowing this as well. We actually you did more than I did, as we'll go on to, but we partook in an event called the Mongol Rally.
Yes.
which some of you may or may not be familiar with. For those of you who aren't, it's basically a 10,000 mile plus journey where you travel from usually somewhere around the UK, although sometimes it's elsewhere, to Mongolia, which is not around the corner, as I'm sure any of you who've got an appreciation of the worldwide globe or atlas would appreciate. But it's not around the corner. And the rules of the rally itself is that you're meant to basically do it in the worst car you can find. Ideally, something that's not bigger than like a 1 litre or a 1.2 litre. And funny enough, I had never heard of this event before, but it was actually Rob, believe it or not, who came across it. I don't know if you want to sort of explain a little bit about how that came about.
How did that come about? I think, if I remember correctly, some friends of mine from school were doing it the year before we started our year in industry. And I saw a YouTube video and I thought, that looks like great fun. And I had a good 5 minutes to myself going, I could do that. That'd be great fun. Who's going to do that with me? And I was like, Sash might be up for it, but then I don't know. But anyway, I'll go upstairs and I'll ask him. And I showed him the video and he was like, okay, when do we leave? And I was like, really? Okay. And then,
I know. I don't know what I was thinking.
But you were like, oh, we have to do it in Burt. So my excitement was immediately shot down to know that.
And for those of you who don't know, Burt is my first car, which I think I've discussed in the first podcast a little bit, which is my Fiat Cinquecento. But
Burt
anyway.
is the automotive equivalent of a self-propelled baked beans can.
Yes, that's fair enough. I can't really argue with that.
It has the technical complexity of a self-propelled baked bean can as well, which does make it quite easy to fix. So yeah, no, we set off in your Fiat Cinquecento, which is as I mentioned, quite tinny in its characteristics as a vehicle. And yeah, you had your Bombay doors gave in Turkey, didn't they?
Well, I mean, we won't go into too much detail, but I mean, the kind of long story short is that I had to basically finish the rally early because I had concocted some sort of virus, not coronavirus, for those of you who wonder, because this was a few years ago now. And basically I had to finish early, but Rob carried on with with another team that we know quite well. In a Vauxhall Agila.
Yeah, I mean, I hitchhiked with a couple of different people just for different legs in different places, because it obviously you're kind of, when you plan out your own thing. I don't know how much anyone knows about Central Asia. Like, whenever you get outside of the Western world, travel becomes quite a logistical proposition. You know, you've got to do quite a lot of admin before you set off, and you have to get quite a few visas, and they have specific start and finish dates. So everything's done to your schedule, and then you've got to try and you kind of got to carry on with your schedule for what you had planned without. But you've got to try and help. You've got to try and jump in with other people where their schedule matches yours, and then jump in with other people where you can, basically. So that's kind of the story of that. And I mean, I jumped in with Marcus and Roland in Istanbul, in there, like rightfully said, the Vauxhall Agila, which is not a particularly interesting vehicle, but it was very, very reliable considering. What we did with it. It was a very reliable car. And
can I just point something out on that front? Actually, sorry to interrupt, but bearing in mind the team that owned this car, I think Marcus bought it for like 200 quid or something, didn't he?
Yeah.
And am I right in saying that he pretty much replaced every single mechanical component underneath that car?
Pretty much. He said when he bought it from a little old lady, and it had 70,000 miles on the clock, and it had never had a service. So it had been completely abused. He said that on the way back from buying it in Manchester to Bath, where he lived at the time, the head gasket blew up. So he had to have that fixed. He had to obviously have a complete service on the car. There was a whole pile of things that certainly shouldn't go wrong on a car with that mileage on it if it had been well looked after. Just in the time, he quite sensibly decided he was going to run it around as a runabout before the rally to uncover any problems. And he pretty much uncovered most of them. But it was a fairly dependable vehicle. That car was so dependable, actually. I put him and another friend from home in touch when that friend from home also wanted to do the rally, and that car then went and did the rally again a second time. And I think Ollie has sold it to yet another team of people who are going to do the rally in that car. So I have to, much as the Vauxhall Agila is not a car I would buy for myself to use for any circumstance whatsoever. It is possibly up there with the likes of something like a Toyota Hilux in terms of being ridiculously indestructible.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get what you're saying, but underneath that car was essentially new because it had a load of new components. Yeah. He may as well have bought, if they made a brand new Vauxhall Agila at the time, he may as well have bought that because, it was essentially the same car. But I'm not detracting from the fact that, it's reliable.
So, yeah, I hitched with Marcus and Roland from Istanbul to a town in Iran called Tabriz, which was an experience. We went all across Turkey, which is again, lots of people have been to Turkey. You'll probably listen to this podcast, and a lot of what we see in the UK or whenever you go on holiday to Turkey is the coastline and the resorts, and the interior of Turkey is a very, very different place from that, which was a fascinating place to see. And we went through some places that had quite a lot of Kurdish separatists, which were a little bit interesting at times because you had to go through military checkpoints. One of the most interesting motoring things I witnessed in Turkey actually was that when we were going to the border with Iran, is they have a normal dual carriageway, and obviously Turkey drives on the right, but the two right-hand lanes of the dual carriageway for 10 kilometers before the border were parked trucks. So to get to the border, you had to go onto the wrong side of the dual carriageway and drive the wrong way down the dual carriageway to actually get to the border because of the queue of trucks waiting to get into Iran, which is pretty interesting. Anyway, I hitchhiked with some other people through Iran, which we kind of had to do very quickly because of, again, the visa requirements, and we'd kind of underestimated how big Iran actually is. So we were just driving. We were on the road every day. We did about 800 kilometers a day every day that we were in Iran for about 4 or 5 days. Sadly, didn't see a whole lot of the country, which is a shame because the people there, whenever they saw that you're in a foreign car, foreign number plate, they always pulled over at petrol stations. They wanted to take you meet their family, wanted to put you up for the night. They wanted to feed you, like show you Iran, which was, I mean, it's possibly, and this is obviously credit to you and your dad and your heritage, is possibly the most friendly country in the world I've ever been to, in that respect.
Yes,
which it was quite sad that I didn't get to spend enough time. I personally would have liked to have spent a lot more time in Iran. And then went into Turkmenistan, which is
it's one of those countries that's just got a bad rep.
Yeah, and I think it definitely has a bad rep, and I think that's perpetuated by a lot of. We're getting into very geopolitical things. We've moved away from cars now, but I mean, it's perpetuated by a lot of very historical tensions between different political factions globally, and I think your media, the media in the world, only reports that because that's kind of. I don't want to say that's what's important, but that's what's kind of relevant to whatever's developing global situation. But when you get on the ground, the people there are definitely the most warm and accommodating people you'll ever find anywhere in the world, from my experience anyway. Anyway, yeah. So then,
so you're saying
we went into Turkmenistan, which is very aptly nicknamed the North Korea of Central Asia. It's a particularly strange country. The person who is the president there is again one of these people who's president for life. He got the job because he was the previous president's dentist. I mean, I don't want to go into too many details. It's a very strange place. If you want to get some more information, you should definitely Google Turkmenistan. And what it's like there. We saw a lot of things. We went to a place called the Devaza gas crater. So for that stage, I hitched with this American team who are still I'm still good friends with today. I hitchhiked. We walked from the road to this place called the Devaza gas crater. It's called the Door to Hell. It's basically a gas crater that kind of collapsed in the 70s, and to try and get rid of the gas, somebody set it on fire. So it's a big burning natural gas crater, which is it's a sight to behold. Put it that way. And we camped there. I say camped. Everyone else brought a tent. I didn't bring my tent. I just put my sleeping bag in the sand and slept under the stars, which was a mistake, because there are many creepy crawlies in the desert, which you don't realize. So that was a bit silly. And then we went through lots of countries in Central Asia. I spent a lot of time in Uzbekistan, which was a fascinating country. Again, and then I was pretty much there waiting for Marcus and Roland, who were the people that picked me up from Istanbul to catch us up. And then we drove again in their Agila to. We went through a place called the Pamir Highway in Tajikistan, which borders Afghanistan, which is very tough on a car, and we were doing it in cars that were very not prepared for the terrain.
Not built for that thing.
The highest point on that mountain pass is actually higher than Mont Blanc. So we drove up to the top of the pass, and we spent a good day on this road, and we were looking at our GPS, and we were like, wow, we're actually higher than Mont Blanc for the whole day. And then we went to the top of the pass, and we were like, wow, we're now pushing 17,000 feet. And that's, I think, the only time in my life I've ever experienced sort of any kind of altitude and altitude sickness. Other people suffered a bit more than myself, and we made a big effort to get down from there in a hurry, because altitude is actually you don't realize how horrible it is until you start coming down. But that kind of starvation of oxygen really starts to affect pretty much everything. You're kind of constantly tired and lethargic, but you can't sleep. It's a very strange experience. And then anyway, we drove down from there, and then we had to turn back because of some administrative problem with getting the cars into Mongolia that we heard about. Basically, the Mongolians wanted us to pay import tax to get the cars into Mongolia, and they wanted a $5,000 deposit to import the cars. And there was mixed reports coming back about whether you got that money back or not. And so we decided that we were going to pretty much abort in Kyrgyzstan. We turned back in Kyrgyzstan, went into Kazakhstan. We went to, from Kyrgyzstan to Kazakhstan, actually, all the way back to Europe, you're on paved roads, actually. If you set your mind to it, you could probably drive to Kyrgyzstan from the UK in about 6 days, possibly less, actually, if you really went for it. The roads are all perfect. But we went to where the Russians launch all of their space program, in a place called Baikonur in the middle of the Kazakh desert, which we weren't allowed into.
I think that's sorry, unrelated sort of, but I think Top Gear went there.
Yeah, actually. They did. Yeah.
The new Top Gear, I think. But anyway, besides the point. So you went through there. We
went to a place called the Aral Sea, which anybody with a sort of any kind of interest in geography will know it was an inland sea that the Soviet Union blocked off. They diverted rivers away from it to divert water to cotton plantations, and they ended up draining the sea. And the sea just dried up, basically. So it's a very interesting place, because the city there is essentially a big port with no water in the middle of the desert, which is very strange. And then we drove back through from Kazakhstan into Russia, and then I actually flew home from Moscow to the UK, because time was starting to get a little bit critical for me to get back in time for university. I was running extremely low on cash, and and my visa didn't have very much time left on it, so I had to sort of hightail it out of Russia and back to the UK.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, actually. I know the journey wasn't as you'd intended it to go, but we didn't actually plan to go to the Pamir highways,
we
did
didn't.
we? I don't think we included that in our. So, I mean, you got to see that, which I imagine was a pretty good experience.
That was, I mean, considering we didn't get to go to Mongolia, that was definitely the highlight of the trip, because obviously we'd planned for sort of seeing this kind of millions of square kilometers of untouched wilderness in Mongolia, and obviously didn't get to see that. And I think that came pretty close, and it was quite exciting to be on the border with Afghanistan. You see quite a lot of you see quite a lot of things from Afghanistan. That part of Tajikistan is sort of a semi-autonomous region that it actually wants to be part of Afghanistan, or the other side of the other part of Afghanistan that's on the border actually wants to be its own country with that part of Tajikistan. So it's very interesting. You can, if you want to, on certain days of the week, cross the border without getting a visa and go into Afghanistan, which I'm sure quite a few of us would have done if we'd have been there on the right day, which is a bit of a shame. But at the same time, I mean, Afghanistan is definitely not a place for the faint-hearted.
No, it isn't. I mean, it's just one of those places you can say, well, I've been to Afghanistan.
Exactly.
And, it's just like, I mean, I don't know too much about Afghanistan, but I can't imagine it's not definitely not a popular tourist place.
It was in the 70s. Sure. It was a very popular tourist place in the 70s. Hippies used to go there to buy fat stacks of weed.
Well, no, that is true, actually. But even you can say, although you didn't go to Afghanistan, you did step foot in China.
We did, yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah, so we drove. I mean, that's the furthest east. I mean, even to this day that I've been, actually, there's a border with between Tajikistan and China and the fence is kind of. I mean, it's high in an alpine pass, so there's not really much security around it, and the area inside China is a vast desert, so it's not really very well policed. So the fence is not very well maintained either. So there's big gaps in the fence. So for shits and giggles, basically, we decided we'd pull over where there was a big gap in the fence and go and take some poignant photos, going, "Oh, look at me, I'm in China." So when I tell people about this trip, I say, "Oh yeah, one summer I drove from the UK to China and back," and they were like, because they're like, "Oh, I miss summer as a kid." And like, what did you do? What was the best summer you ever had when you were growing up? And I was like, "Oh, one summer I drove to China."
Drove to China. And they're like, "What?" This is the thing, though. So a lot of people who do the rally as well, they never really go to China because you need a separate license. You need to actually take a test there. Am I right in saying? Which is why it's never really considered an option to go to China. I mean, a lot of people don't consider going to Iran, for example, because the fact that you need a guide and so on if you're from the UK and so on and so forth. So it's not to underestimate by any means, because obviously we did all the prep for it, which took months. I mean, I think we decided that we were going to do it end of second year before we actually started placement, and then we were going to do it after we finished our placement. So basically, I don't know, fair to say we started about a year.
We did about a year's planning. Probably. Yeah, I mean, I think we did a lot of. I mean, planning is a fairly loose term. We spent about 6 months Googling things. And then a good 2 months sort of starting to do things like visas and things that sort of took a bit of time. I'd say the last 4 months before we left was actually where things really kind of kicked up a gear in terms of planning and preparation. Although preparations mechanically for the car, we swapped the engine on the Cinquecento, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. No, exactly. No, they really did. They really did step up. To be fair. And like you say, it's just a logistical. You have to be very organised because, I mean, to be fair to you, mate, you sorted out all of the visas and so on and so forth, and we had to drive down to London quite a few times and get everything sorted. But we managed to get it done in quite good time, actually.
Yeah.
We planned it quite well in that sense, because I knew some other teams were really struggling to actually get their visas before they were actually due to leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So even though my stint at the trip was good on, because we started that year, it started from the Goodwood racetrack, which is actually located not that far from where my parents live. And I have to say that was a pretty interesting and, I would say, a great experience in itself, just being able to gather all those shitty cars together on a historic racetrack. So much so that my maths teacher had done a Facebook. My old maths teacher had done a Facebook status about me, saying, basically quoted my name. It was like, "Is today the day of the Mongol Rally? Because I live in Chichester and there's a shit ton of shit cars by the Goodwood racetrack." And I was like, "Yes, it is." So yeah, so it was it was a good trip actually, even though my stint was very brief. And it was it's a bit sad that ultimately, irrespective of what would have happened, we were kind of doomed from the get-go, because it would have been very unlikely that either circumstances that we would have actually gone to Mongolia because of what had happened. So irrespective of whether I was still there or not, I can't imagine a situation where both of us would have turned around to each other and said, let's just pay the fight, because we didn't have £5,000 or dollars anyway. No. So that wasn't really an option, which is a bit sad, really, because obviously that's the aim of the trip. And I think so. And I think a lot of people that did it in our year, so we did it in 2016, so 4 years ago now, actually said that they wanted to do it again in 2020. Am I right in saying that?
And the irony of that this year.
Yeah. And obviously 4 years ago, we were like, yeah, let's do it in 2020. Let's do it in 2020. And then obviously the Mongol Rally, which is, I think, the first time since it's originally started back in 2004, I think it started. Yeah. It's been cancelled this year, obviously, because of everything that's been going on. Yep. Which is sad, really, but obviously due to legit reasons. So it's, I don't know, like, well, I mean, again, not wanted to dwell too much into it, although I think people will be interested in sort of road trips and journeys and so on. But Owen, looking back at what you know now, would you, well, a couple of things. A, would you do it again? And if so, what would you have done differently, or what would you want to do the next time that you went?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do it again. Now, sort of having graduated and grown up and having a kind of a serious job, you kind of think, well, when am I going to find the time to do that? Which is a bit of a shame, because especially when you walk away from something like that, you kind of want to be this kind of unkempt, bearded, long-haired adventurer type person, and never kind of live a normal life again. And I think about it now, and I'm like, oh yeah, but when am I going to find the time to do that? When am I going to get the time off work? And that's quite a shame, really, in some respects. And I do it's a kind of constant dilemma. Not a constant dilemma, but it's definitely something to think about.
Of course.
What would I do differently? I think, having done it, financially, we were wildly unprepared. I mean, we had. Yeah. I mean, I had money in the bank for what I thought was going to finance myself for the trip, and I think you did as well. And I mean, I don't think financially we'd have been able to go as far as I did, hitching a ride. So I owe those other guys a lot for
favors,
a lot of favors, and a lot of, and I tried to earn my keep wherever I could. But I think in terms of you underestimate how many sort of weird backhanders and bribes and things you've got to kind of pay that you don't anticipate in funny places, when you get to borders, and that just kind of saps all your money out of you. So I mean, I don't think either of us would have been really able to afford to go as far as I did. We'd have certainly got to a point and realized that it was kind of a point of no return. The money we have left has to fund us to do a U-turn and get back. Which would have been interesting, because I think that actually would have been interesting from a point of view to be able to look at a map and go, right, what's the cheapest way to get home from here?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, my view is, if we had got to that stage that you're suggesting, that depending on how much extra money we would have needed, right, realistically, and if we were, say, like, not far from Mongolia, you wouldn't have, and we could have gone to Mongolia that year, obviously. Yeah. You wouldn't turn back round if you were that close. You only needed, like, I don't know, $1,000 extra.
Yeah, no,
right?
Sure.
Yeah, like, I would have. I mean, it would have been a bit difficult, but I would have begged, borrowed, and steal. I would have rang somebody and said, "Look, just transfer me $1,000, and I'll sort you out later." You would have get that, but I suppose it depends how much. Yeah, you would have made it happen if you're that close.
I mean, I left. So put it into perspective, I left a few £100 with my mum in the UK as like not an emergency fund, but kind of like a top-up fund for we got like these post office money market cards or whatever they are, and I had to tell mum to wire that money to that card when we got to the capital of Tajikistan, which is geographically just slightly less than 2/3 of the way to Mongolia. And I hadn't had to pay any of the things to actually get the car across the borders at any point either.
But don't forget, I mean, you would have been splitting the cost, obviously, with me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, what got... Well, I lost my train of thought, actually. I mean, I have no idea, because people have asked me, how much do you reckon it cost you? And obviously, we didn't do the whole thing. And I'm not saying we discuss figures now, but I genuinely have no idea, because it's just one of those things that you kind of do as you go along, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, we did a lot of... one of the most expensive parts is actually the visas to a certain extent. Like stuff like the Iranian visa, the Russian visa, they were quite expensive. Stuff like the Mongolian visa wasn't too bad, I remember.
Yeah.
And Uzbekistan. And obviously, as well as that, I mean, we had the added bonus. I know we spent a bit of time and money trying to get stuff sorted, but we had a car from the get-go. So it's not like we had to buy a car. I know we did an engine swap on it, which we can go on to maybe. And we did a few other bits and pieces, but relatively speaking, we didn't actually spend much on the vehicle.
No, of course
not. The vehicle up and running.
And I think so cost-wise, I mean, it all depends on your level of comfort and how kind of young and foolish you want to be in terms of what kind of accommodation you want. You can definitely do it very cheaply, and you can definitely take a very cheap route. If you really want to, you could just go through Eastern Europe and into Russia and then drive across Russia and into Mongolia. From a visa perspective, that's very cheap. Russia's a very cheap place to eat, sleep, and party, as we found out when we got to Moscow. And then you can do, I mean, we possibly picked one of the most expensive routes from a visa perspective to go south through Turkey and Iran. I would definitely recommend that is the way to go. In terms
it's definitely the more interesting route.
Sure.
I mean, my viewpoint on this sort of thing is, if you're going to do a journey like that, why would you not go the more interesting way, the more interesting routes?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's pointless, I think. But obviously it depends on people's schedules and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I wouldn't like to just blitz it. Because, I mean, I think the quickest team that did it was just under 6 weeks, I think. They managed to get to Mongolia from the UK, which is pretty good going. Yeah. I think it was in a Citroen AX as well, which is not exactly the most luxurious car. Or it was that year anyway.
In terms of lessons learnt, having done it and probably being a little bit more worldly wise now myself, based on the kind of job I do, the places I go for my work and that kind of thing, definitely chill out. I mean, I looked back at some of the GoPro footage and I was definitely pretty highly strung for a good portion of that, especially the trip we were together. Just, I don't know, worrying about things that were going to go wrong or what we were going to do or where we were going to go. We did a hell of a lot of planning and we had it pretty well boxed off. So, I mean, I definitely, looking back, I could have just done with chilling out and not worrying so much about anything like that. And this is something you're going to laugh about and rail me for. Definitely take food, which we didn't take, and that was my fault. But would you like to tell the listeners what you did manage to pack in the absence of me taking sustenance for the journey?
Oh yes. So Rob said to me originally, a couple of weeks before, like we were due to set off and we were finishing up our placements, I think. At some stages throughout the whole transformation, you had the car for a bit because you were sort of testing out, doing a few bits and pieces. I had the car for a bit. I can't remember how, but he was like, basically, you need to pack really light. And I was like, really? I was like, we're going to be gone for like 2 months. I was like, I need everything. I'm one of these people that I can't pack lightly. It's just I'd like to take stuff with me that you need just in case, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that I managed to sneak in, if you like, although I thought it was very important, obviously, was I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was a book about Italian pieces of design.
It was a hardback book about Italian design.
Hardback. Yeah. And it was a beautiful book. I got given it like for my birthday or something.
I gave it to you for your birthday.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. And it was great because it had a Lamborghini Miura on the front of it, which is a great piece of Italian design. If you're listening. For the automotive section of this podcast, and they had other bits in it.
For the listeners, to put this perspective, the size of this book was that if you opened it up, it was probably slightly bigger than an A3 page, and it was a good inch thick of glossy paper. This publication was for a library of things. And it was huge.
Yeah, it was a big book. In hindsight, probably not a wise thing to pack. But yeah, it's funny you should say that because to tell the viewers a little bit more about what had happened. So obviously, after I'd left and you had gone further on the trip, I had actually left the vehicle, my car, at what turned out to be a relative of mine that I didn't know existed at the time in Istanbul. And I left the car there, went back to the UK, sort of recovered, sorted myself out, etc., etc. And I then realised, oh shit, I've got a car on British plates on the other continent.
only just in Asia, but yeah.
Yeah, we're still on another continent. But I was like, shit, I probably should do something about that. How am I going to get hard back? Anyway, I tried various different methods, blah blah. Anyway. The long story short, really, is that I was trying to find a couple of friends of mine and trying to make the best out of, for me, what was a little bit of a shit situation. And maybe make it into like a return road trip while Rob was coming back. And I was like, cool. Anyway, I tried to find another person or another two people that could drive so I could drive the car back and take it in turns because the car was in Turkey. Anyway, I couldn't find anyone. So out of all of my friends that I have, and not that I have that many, but I have a fair few that I can drive, none of them were available, the ones that could drive. So I ended up with two people, both of which who couldn't drive, coming with me on this trip, basically for just a jolly across Europe.
And they're both called Michael.
And they're both called Michael. I don't know whether they'll ever feature on the podcast, but they're interesting chaps, good friends of mine. And to be fair, it was a really, really good trip. We went a different route. We drove it from Turkey through Greece. Then we caught a ferry from Greece to Italy. Went to go see some of my family in Italy that my mum's side's from, and then sort of drove through Europe and so on. It was a great trip. I mean, we made the best out of what was kind of a bad situation and had a really, really good trip across Europe. So yeah, I mean, I had a sort of different take on it, obviously compared to Rob. It's not how I intended it.
You did get a nice adventure coming back though as well. I think
yes, it was
Greece. I mean, Greece and Italy and places I've never been to, and it's in some respects that your trip back through Europe was probably nicer than our trip through Europe.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. There was a few factors that played into it. First of all, we were traveling initially in the peak of summer. So we were traveling mid-July. It's absolutely baking wherever you go, especially across Europe, right? So it was the peak of that. We're obviously under a relatively tight-ish schedule. We had a lot of ground to cover in not a lot of time. I mean, I think we crossed Europe within like the first week or 10 days or something like that, around that mark. So we had a lot of ground to cover. Whereas on my return journey, we took 2 weeks, right? And we had a shorter distance. Well, we weren't under such a tight schedule, and it wasn't as hot as what it was back in July because we went in September. So factors like that do come into play, especially when your car doesn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is another thing that I'm surprised you haven't mentioned about doing it again. I think that car, bless it, despite the fact that I love it to pieces, is not really designed for this sort of thing.
It's
so much
valiant in its effort.
Yeah.
I have to admit. I remember there were several times on the journey I looked at it and looked where we were, and I thought to myself, "Wow, that is impressive."
Yes.
Especially, I think where it really hit me was where we had to pull over to buy some toll stickers to go onto the Turkish motorway, and I looked at it, and that was hot. That was probably mid-40s. We spent hours trying to buy a flipping sticker for the car, and I came out of that toll thing, looked at this toll booth on the Turkish motorway, probably a couple of hours from Istanbul, and I thought to myself, "Wow, we are a long way from home now," and
we are.
And that is a small automobile with no power whatsoever. And then we had to drive it into Istanbul at rush hour, which is, to this day, probably one of the most frightening driving experiences of my life.
Yeah, I mean, you took control of that. I was the passenger in that instance, but
it took both of us. It took both of us to do it. To be fair, it was not easy.
It was very difficult, and I think both Michaels got an appreciation for that when we were coming back, because obviously we had to still drive through Istanbul, and they were like, "Fucking hell, how did he get through here?" I was like, "I don't know, mate. I don't know." But that car was impressive. I remember that day that we got that tow. Actually, it was probably the hottest temperature that I've ever experienced, and it was so hot, and I didn't even know my car could do this. But I had turned the engine off, and the fan was running, and as it normally does, and it cooled down, right? Or the fan had turned off, and then I came back, I had the key in my hand. So much so that it was so hot that the car's fan automatically turned on, and I didn't even know my car could do that. And I was like, I don't know whether it was intended to do that or not. It was just because it was so hot. I have no idea, but fair play. I mean, but that just goes to show how hot it was, because I've never seen it happen like that. I mean, to be fair to the car, it didn't cause us any issues. The only two things. I mean, up on the way to the Turkish border, I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
There was a very steep hill. Or quite a steep hill. Well, I say steep hill. Everyone else that was driving around us got up it absolutely fine, with no trouble, like no struggle, because we were against a Skoda Fabia, Toyota Starlet, which was basically the Bugatti Veyron of the Mongol Rally. That 1.3 litre Starlet, honestly, that thing flew in comparison to it. We were by far the slowest car out of the group that we were travelling in. For sure.
Yeah.
And there was a very kind of steep hill, and obviously it was like 40, 45 degrees or whatever it was. And I remember the car making a noise that I've never heard before or since. And it was like the car had just drank a load of oil.
Yeah.
Like it just consumed it. And I was like, "Oh shit, is the car going to die?" I was like, "I don't know."
We got to the top of the hill, and it was we were trying to keep up with everyone, and it kind of I know what you mean. It kind of felt like something had gone through that shouldn't have gone through, and it sounded strange. And then we kind of backed it off and just sort of caught up to the group, and it had kind of a rough idle when we turned it off, and we were like, that's
that ain't good.
That's not good." And then we turned it on, and it was fine. Yeah,
it fixed itself. I thought we might have maybe blown a piston ring or something. I don't know, but I was fearing the worst.
Yeah.
But touch wood, it was absolutely fine. I mean, like I say, on my journey, I don't think there was any problems on the way when I was with you. The only problem we had on the way, two things on the way back, was that one of the windscreen wipers stopped working. But I know what that reason was for that is because basically a cable tie broke. It was a bit of a bodge job before anyway. And funnily enough, when we were driving all the way back, literally about 20 minutes from my parents' house in the UK, it started making a really weird noise. And I was like, we can't be this close and break down. I was like, we can't be. Like, that would be funny, though. You know,
that would be the place to do it.
I mean, yeah, it would, but it would be insult to injury. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what it turned out, I didn't know on the day, but it turned out the following day, I had a look around the car. And what had happened was, and again, I've never seen this before or since, but a huge chunk of the tyre had just come off, right? So much so that you could actually see, I don't know what they call it in tyre terms, but you could actually see like the bare bit of the tyre.
The weave, the ironwork.
Yeah, the weave. Yeah, you could see that. And I was like, I've never seen that before. I was like, that's interesting. And what had happened, obviously, when that came off, it was producing some sort of frequency or whatever, and it was just causing this weird noise because it wasn't anything coming from the engine. But I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. By Washington roundabout, about 20 minutes from where my parents live, we had to pull over, and because I didn't know what it was, and so it would have been quite funny if it was actually something. But thankfully, it wasn't anything bad. The car did well. I mean, you said anyway that you would have doubted the car, even if we'd say gone all the way, that the car would have actually made it.
I think once you get into the rougher roads, the unpaved roads of Central Asia, I think we would have. I don't think I actually don't think the engine or the drivetrain would have let go. I think what we'd have done is we'd have hit something, or we'd have done actual damage to the suspension or the chassis because of how rough the roads were. And I obviously that car's not built for anything remotely like that. But obviously knowing a little bit about that car mechanically, I think that we'd have definitely destroyed something fairly crucial to our ability to actually continue to roll actually anywhere.
Right. I do have to agree. I think something on the suspension probably would have given way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've spoken about the Mongol Rally quite a lot now.
We have. I mean, yes, it's an interesting topic, and if anyone does have any questions regarding that, then please feel free to get in touch. I'll put Rob's details as well. Because it is a really interesting journey, and even though I didn't partake in a lot of it, I would still recommend it because I think it is a great experience. And when this is all over and so on and so forth, and hopefully next year people can go do it, I would recommend it if you get the chance.
Absolutely.
So what next?
What else did we discuss?
We spoke about the rally. I mean, there's nothing really. I mean, obviously since then, we could talk a lot about our lives, but
not really motoring related.
They're not really motoring related. I mean, since then, obviously we left. We went back to our final year of uni and so on, and then Rob got a job, and then I was doing my masters, and then he went to Abu Dhabi, and now I'm working as well. So we've become proper adults. A lot has changed over the past 4 years, which is sad, really. But I suppose what we could talk about actually is on the subject of cars is perhaps still on the theme of road trip and maybe on the lines of dream cars. Like, what do you? I mean, I'm guessing you're a fan of a road trip, Rob. I mean, I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of a road trip. I think that's something that when this is all over, the whole COVID thing is over, and you're planning a trip to come here, I think a road trip is something we should definitely do, especially in this part of the world. I think it'd be really interesting. But yeah, no, I mean, I've had to take some interesting road trips for work now, which is quite. Which is a hell of a lot less of an undertaking than it would have been if I hadn't done something like the Mongol Rally. So I mean, I've done a trip down to the middle of the desert in Oman from here, which is about I think about 500 miles, and then I drove down to Muscat for work from here, which again is a slightly different part of Oman. It's still a long way, and yeah, I mean, Oman's a beautiful place to go actually for a road trip. Sadly, I haven't managed to experience them in a car that is nice in any way. The nicest car I had to drive into Oman for a road trip was a 2010 Mitsubishi Pajero, which is a Shogun actually. If you're in the UK, it's the same as a Shogun, but I don't know what it's like in the UK. In here, at least, they're 4-speed automatics coupled to a 3.6 litre V6.
Wow, what a recipe!
Yeah, it's when you hear like, I mean, they're not. It's not what I'd spend my money on. It's okay. It's not too bad. It's certainly for going down into the middle of the desert. It's fine. You're going on pretty straight roads. You don't need to have to do any cornering. They're fast enough. But they are not. They're not nice to sit in. Even the seats are not. I mean, I'm a big chap. At 6'5", and Japanese cars do not have seats built for 2-meter tall Dutchmen, basically. So yeah, I mean, it's strange. Like the seat actually isn't wide enough for my arse or my back.
Right.
The seat, you can't lower down enough so that I can actually see out of the windscreen comfortably. These are all very much me problems. So
I was going to say, they sound very specific to the taller man.
They are very specific to the taller man. It's interesting because I work with a lot of Filipinos, and they've seen that I've bought a Golf now, and they laugh. They're like, how does a man like you fit in a Golf? And I go, perfectly.
Quite easily.
Because they're designed for Germans who are tall people.
Exactly. And they understand ergonomics, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think Mitsubishis would be fine for the smaller statured person, but I mean, they're not comfortable for me, put it that way. They also couple to a 4-speed gearbox. It's for 2010, a 4-speed gearbox? Really?
Yeah.
It's just lazy. Yeah. And then, the other when I went down to Muscat, I took a Kia Sportage, which is just appalling in every single sense of the word.
Right. I mean, I actually have not driven, but I've been a passenger on a Kia Sportage, and I thought it was all right, actually. It was, again, another hot summer's day a few years ago. I actually quite liked it. I think they're not bad-looking cars. But yeah, I mean, these are all, as you've just pointed out, Rob, terrible vehicles, generally speaking, with as far as modern day standards go, ancient technology as well, and gearboxes and so on. So what would be your dream cars, if somebody said to you, money no object, or
I mean, if I didn't have
you could put so many criteria, but yeah,
if I didn't have to work for a living, if I was a man of independent means, let's say, and very, very well funded independent means, I think. I mean, there's a plethora of cars I've had. I'd quite like a Mercedes GTS.
They're quite nice. Is that's the more modern SLS?
Yeah,
isn't it?
It's
the one after
that. Grown up than the SLS. It doesn't have silly doors.
I quite like the doors on the SLS, but yeah, I mean,
I know what you mean. I think the GTS is a nice car.
They're nice cars.
I'd have one of those, and I mean, if you're going to have a daily, something probably like a Golf R, actually. Something.
God, you're interesting.
No, I don't know, like an Audi RS4 or something like that as your daily. And I tell you what I really would like, because we thought I gave this some thought. I would really like a Bugatti Type 35B.
Right, an ancient Bugatti. Why is that?
Well, first of all, they're really cool.
I mean, yeah, they're kind of from the Bentley blower sort of area, aren't they? They do look quite
and
cool.
You could tell everyone I've got a Bugatti, and they'd assume you would go Veyron or Chiron, and then they'd get there, and you've got a 2.3 litre straight 8, and
yes,
and then they go, "This wasn't the Bugatti I envisaged when you said I had one."
Yes.
But personally, for me, they were the cars that my great grandfather used to race when back in the 20s and 30s when he was a racing driver.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Didn't know he was a racing driver.
I mean, I never knew my great grandfather, but I think they're a beautiful looking car, and they're for me it's a little bit of my family history that would be nice to have,
Rekindle, yeah. I mean, I must confess, as a petrol head as well, I am not massively familiar / not that I'm not interested, but I'm not too clued up on cars pre 50s, like 50s, mid 50s onwards is where I sort of start to gain interest. To be honest with you, 60s, 70s, and 80s is like my prime era for vehicle interest. I think that's probably one of it. I mean, and more modern stuff as well. Don't get me wrong, like the 90s and even some of the naughty stuff. But prior to the 50s, I don't know, and I think the reason for that is actually I've just never really. I mean, I appreciate them for what they are, but obviously, each decade of cars has been influenced by different designs and styling, and obviously you can definitely tell a 40s car from like a 70s car and so on. So that era of styling I've just never really fully appreciated, I don't think, or I've never really been around them a lot to appreciate.
They had some very quirky features, especially cars of the 40s, especially the cars of the 50s and probably the 60s as well had some strange features. We were talking about it yesterday, weren't we? The whole idea that you'd have a car with overdrive, which was essentially a secondary transfer box that would only work on the top 2 gears. This is from the time when you only had 4 gears in your car, and then you'd have these overdrive gears. And there was a feature that's obviously they've just replaced it with more gears in the gearbox because that makes more sense. It's more reliable.
More sense.
But it's interesting that there's a whole, especially if you delve into that kind of earlier era of cars, you find things that have become part of a car now that have just been engineered slightly differently, and you kind of take for granted.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think I think like that. I think they did a segment on Top Gear a few years back where, what was the first car that we take for granted as being like conventional controls and stuff like that, and it was like this Cadillac, because a lot of people think, it's a Ford Model T. But the Ford Model T had like the accelerator on the steering wheel and stuff like that. So it had a very odd, it didn't have like what a brake, a clutch, and an accelerator pedal and a key in the ignition like you'd expect in a normal car nowadays. But I mean, I get it. Like, so you're saying you'd have a daily like to be fair, mate, you could probably that GTS could probably be an all right daily. I mean, you probably wouldn't want to daily it, but something like
parking it at Tesco's might be problematic.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of room in the boot. Yeah, no, I get that. So still very German orientated, safe to say. You like your German.
I do. I think as a nation, the Germans are the best at building. It's part of their entire psyche as a nation is building cars. I mean, Germany is probably the most car-y place in the world because everything about their, I mean, a huge portion of their economy is based around automotive production, but
yes,
they are very, very discerning about the cars that they buy as a people, and they don't compromise on things. I personally think they're the best at building cars. If you and everything they buy, everything they make is a pleasurable thing to drive and a pleasurable thing to own. All the way from something like a Volkswagen up, all the way to something like an Audi RS7 or a Mercedes G-Wagon or something. Those all from top to bottom, they're all very good at the basic specification of what a car should be.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. When it comes to the way they're built and so on, I second to none. I think they are. I mean, I have to say that. I mean, as you know, I think German cars are a little bit soulless, in my opinion. I think they're almost too good in some respects, right? And they're too, which is not necessarily complaint. Obviously, I just have very specific requirements for a car. But I have to say that my favourite German car brand, probably, and it's probably like the rarest one out of all of them, is probably a Porsche. I quite like a Porsche. I mean, I remember a few years ago sitting in a brand new 911 and getting into it, and it literally felt like you were in a bank vault. It was so beautifully made, and everything is where you'd expect it to be, right? And I did like that. And I've never driven one, but I've heard from other people that are just fantastic to drive. And that they're just great. So, I mean, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't have expected any different anyway, to be fair.
Well, what else would I have as a dream car? No, I mean, to be fair, I've pretty much covered it. What about you? I mean, I could probably hazard a guess, but
Well, funny enough, I mean, I did actually touch upon this. I mean, I am going to do this as a segment for everyone that's on, probably. But I did touch upon this with Matt. But my dream car would be a money and object. Well, I quite I mean, you'd guess anyway, but it would be an Alfa Romeo of some description. So, I mean, I really like the original Spider and the GTV6. Those are probably my favourite Alphas of all time.
What was that one?
So
what was that one they did that was called? What was that Disco Volante?
Oh yes, that was based on an 8C.
Yes,
it wasn't made by Alfa, but it was made by an Italian coach builder, and took the body, the underpinnings of an AC, and put a new body on it essentially, and did a few changes. That's a beautiful car as well. I mean, and the 8C itself, the original 8C, I think is a wonderful looking bit of kit, and they only made 500 of them, and they are worth an absolute fortune now.
By and large,
they're worth...
Italians make very, very good-looking cars, with the exception of the Alfa Romeo that you owned, which was hideous.
Yes, I mean, I did touch upon it. So I owned a 166, and pre-facelift, it was a bit of a Marmite car. You either loved it or you hated it, and in most people's case, you hated it.
It hated you.
It did hate me, yes. I mean, I don't know whether I touched upon this, but basically, I mean, the car exploded on me. And ever since that point, it was fine for the first 4 or 5 months that I owned it. And then the remaining year that I owned it, it just gave me misery and financial bankruptcy.
Financial bankruptcy.
Yeah, so it's it was an interesting experience. I love Alfa Romeo, but I wouldn't get one again until I had a bit of spare cash, or a lot of spare cash in the bank, and it probably wouldn't be my primary vehicle. Although, having said that, going back to the whole dream cars, like I would have those Alphas, those like maybe a GTV6 or a Spider, N-Slash or a Spider, but my daily would still probably be an Alfa as well. I mean, or maybe a Maserati, I'm not sure, but I would get probably the new Giulia Quadrifoglio.
As a daily,
I love that car.
You're not fond of arriving, are you?
No, I mean, to be fair, I thought up until the other day, I thought Alfa Romeo had got have sussed out the reliability thing, but it turns out I was wrong, because I saw on somebody's profile that they had a brand new Stelvio, the little 4x4 thing, top spec one, like the QV equivalent, and all the electrics failed, and they were stranded on the side of the A3.
I shouldn't laugh at somebody else's misfortune, but it does surprise me that they just can't get it right.
No, I know. It's just they're too busy having lunch and drinking wine. That's the issue. But I mean, a QV might be a bit brave as a daily, but I'm not sure. Either that or a Maserati Quattroporte, but they're both terribly unreliable cars as well.
I've thought of another car I'd love as a dream car, and this is purely on the basis that my screensaver on my spare screen of my desktop that I'm looking at is the French Riviera. A Ferrari California
Daytona.
No, sorry, no,
Daytona,
not California. Ferrari Daytona. That was the one. They are beautiful looking cars.
They are lovely looking cars, the Daytona. An old Ferrari would be lovely. I mean, I like Ferraris in general. I mean, even as something a bit more modern, like, do you remember the 599?
Oh, yeah.
Ferrari?
Yeah.
They're super cheap. Well, I say super cheap. I mean, they're like 80k, but they're like the lowest that car will ever be. They're actually worth not a lot in the whole Ferrari world at the moment, and they're still young enough to be good and old enough to be a bit more, that's a bit of a quirky. Because the trouble is, from all the reviews that I've read, and there's a load of YouTubers that I follow, and here's a shameless plug. I've got a YouTube channel if you want to check it out, Stories with Sash.
Same name.
That test drive these cars. And a lot of the modern Ferraris, particularly like the big ones, like the 812, they say it's too powerful. Like, you cannot actually use that power on the road. And even if you go anywhere near to using that power, you just scare yourself
to death.
Yeah, to death. Yeah. You just shit yourself. So
I have to say that's even.
Like,
I mean, even in the Golf R, I get to the point where I feel like it's more most of the power. I'm never using most of the power. Actually, it's a very nice thing to have, but it does scare me quite frequently. Actually.
Oh yeah, no, I bet. I mean, a lot of people are saying the Golf R and the Ferrari 812 are pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely.
Yeah. I mean, the 800 horsepower in the Ferrari rear-wheel drive and your four-wheel drive little hatchback. I mean,
no, but the point you're making is that like there's certainly there's a limit to how much you really need on the road.
Yes.
And that is actually, again, that's kind of, you talk about power figures, but it's what actually is more important is your power to weight. And your power to weight in a Ferrari is ridiculous.
Yes, it is. You're right. And I think to kind of nick a quote from, I think it was one of the Top Gear gang, James May, maybe. He said, and I agree with him, I don't feel like performance figures are really that relevant. It's about the sensation of speed, not the amount of it, if that makes sense, right? How it actually makes you feel and how you can actually use it. I think that's more important. And I feel like, although I haven't driven a load of them, I've driven quite a few modern cars now. And, okay, they've been sort of mundane sort of things, but you lose that, I think, a lot with modern cars.
Yeah.
Because you just feel so isolated compared to the rest of the world. And what I really hate nowadays is the fake exhaust sounds that they project through the speakers.
Yeah.
Right? That's terrible. Like, they need to get rid of that ASAP. I know why they're doing it. It's because they want you to feel like you're making a lot of racket and you're going really fast, but they want your neighbours to still be asleep. Right? So you don't want to piss off your neighbours, essentially, right? And because of that, they're like, well, whereas if you have a classic Mustang, for example, a 67 Mustang, your whole neighbourhood is going to know when you start that.
Have you ever watched that?
And
have you ever watched that video of somebody? It's a dash cam from the 70s, I want to say, of somebody racing a car through the streets of Paris really early in the morning.
Yeah, didn't they use it on a Snow Patrol video?
Yes, they did. But the actual original video was shot from a Mercedes, and then they did it again in a Ferrari and recorded the sound, and then they dubbed the sound over the recording from the Mercedes. Because the Mercedes, because the Mercedes was handled better and they could get it through the streets of Paris more easily, but it didn't generate the sound they wanted. So they then recorded the sound doing the same route in a Ferrari, and then dubbed it over and like kind of stretched it and compressed it where it needed to be stretched and compressed, so that the noise was actually from a Ferrari.
I didn't know that. I mean, it did sound like it was from a sporty car, but I didn't know they originally recorded it on a Mercedes. Yeah. That's interesting. That's a fun fact. That's a good, maybe a pub quiz. You've
got to be scraping the bottom of the pub quiz question bucket to be getting down to that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, at the moment we're allowed in pubs, but we might not be allowed it again. I don't know. Who knows?
Zoom quiz.
Zoom quiz, yes. I mean, I made some exciting Zoom quizzes over lockdown, anyway. But I'm conscious of the time because we've spoken for another hour or so.
You're going to have to trim this down, mate. Because I mean, I wouldn't listen to it back. Put it that way.
Well, I don't know. It's a nice podcast for people who are car enthusiasts to listen to, and people enjoy it. Then we can carry on doing more. But mate, honestly, it's been a pleasure having you.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure here
on the cast, and it's amazing that I'm still baffled that we can actually do this, and you're not even with me. You're on the other side of the world. That's crazy. So I'm sure we'll have you on again. For the viewers who, if they're still listening,
we haven't switched over to some other podcast about something a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, maybe the Car Throttle podcast. I wouldn't blame you. It's a good podcast.
Definitely.
Rob, hopefully, when I go over to Abu Dhabi, hopefully later in the year, we will actually be able to do some video stuff as well. So, yes,
stuff on film.
That'd be good.
Absolutely,
stuff on film. So what I'll do is we'll end it there. I'll play my little exit music that I have, which I think I'm quite fond of actually, and we shall see you again soon from here from the UK. Thank you for listening, and
been a pleasure.
Rob,
from Abu Dhabi.
Yes, and speak to you guys soon. Ta-ra now.